Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. Please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Alex Edmonds, who is a professor of finance at London Business School. Hey, Alex, how are you doing?
Great, thanks, Adrian. It's great to be on the show.
Thank you very much. So, Alex, for the benefit of our listeners and people that read the show highlights and stuff, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also about the work that you do?
Yeah, I'm a professor of finance at London Business School and I focus on responsible business. But while a professor's day job is teaching and research, what I spend most of my time doing is interacting with companies and investors and policymakers on how to put responsibility into practice.
Oh, perfect. Now, the reason why we arranged to talk today is that you've actually just written a new book. It's just come out, and congratulations on that. I know about the book writing process. Sometimes it's not the easiest thing in the world, but it's always kind of like nice when it's finished, rather than kind of necessarily when you're going through it. I'm sure you would agree. But anyway, the book is called "Grow the Pie: How Great Companies Deliver Both Purpose and Profit," and purpose is a thing that we kind of like see coming up more and more in the whole experience domain, which is an area that I focus on. So when I saw the book, I thought that's great. I'll try and kind of reach out to Alex and we'll arrange time to talk. So can you tell me a bit more about the book and how it came about and who's it for? And so what is its main thesis, as it were?
Sure. So the book is about how critical it is for a company to have a purpose to serve wider society. So why did this come about? There's a big controversy about business. That business focuses purely on generating profits for investors or high pay for the CEO, and is paying scant attention to some of the main challenges that the world faces today, such as climate change or income inequality or automation. And so why the book is called Grow the Pie is that many CEOs have what I call the pie splitting mentality, which is that the value that a company creates is a fixed pie.
Right.
So anything that you give to society is at the expense of companies, and therefore they're trying to minimize what they're giving to society. And so why I wanted to write that book is to say, well, actually, if you try to create value for society, treat your workers better, treat your customers better, this isn't at the expense of profit. It actually supports profit. So it's in your interest to take purpose seriously, and not just by signing statements and so on, but actually putting it into practice, because this actually helps your business in the long term.
And is that sort of related to this idea of rather than having so we can equate it to like having a fixed mindset rather than a growth mindset, or like not taking a zero-sum game approach to things, actually kind of to open your eyes a little bit and think a bit bigger. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that's a very close analogy. So the zero-sum thinking is thinking that if I'm going to give £1 to my workers in the form of higher pay, that reduces my profits by £1.
Right.
But the idea of grow the pie, or this positive sum mindset, is that actually if I give £1 to my workers by paying them better or treating them better, then they're going to become more innovative and more productive. And therefore, I'm going to benefit in terms of my long-term profits as a byproduct. So what this means is that when you're thinking about serving society, this isn't just charity, it's not fluffy, it's something which is fundamental to the success of your business. So you asked earlier who the book is for. It's both for business leaders, but also for investors, because often investors think, when I evaluate a company, I'm just going to look at how much profit they make. I don't really care about these non-financial factors. But what I'm showing is that these non-financial factors are actually financial in the long term.
Right. That's really interesting. So, so I don't want to kind of go through the book chapter and verse, because obviously you want people to buy a copy of the book. That's kind of normal. So what I'd like to do is maybe to give people a flavor of the book. If it's okay with you, I wanted to sort of dig into a few kind of areas or themes or quotes that's included in the book, just to give people an idea of what's in it. So the thing I wanted to start with, though, is like right at the top of the agenda is this: why purpose and why now?
Yes, so what prompted me to start writing the book about 2 years ago was just the huge crisis of capitalism that we saw. So on the one hand, as I mentioned, we had high wages and high profits and high CEO pay. But on the other hand, you had Extinction Rebellion, Occupy movements, Brexit, the election of populist leaders. So just the view that the current system of capitalism isn't working for ordinary people.
Right.
So the immediate reaction to that is that, well, what should we do? We should like straitjacket business with a lot of heavy regulation, but that's no good, because that's too much. The other extreme is that businesses can be a force for good. They can make products that transform customers' lives for the better, provide employees with healthy and fulfilling careers. So what I wanted was not a solution that works for us, but not them, but a solution that works for both. And that's the whole idea of growing the pie, is a different approach to business that not only is good for society, but is also profitable for companies.
Perfect. I mean, and because if we go about this kind of like, you talk about this, you talk about the pie splitting mentality, and we kind of, alluded to this as a positive sum approach, or a, like a growth mindset approach. I mean, how far, what should we be aiming for? I mean, when we talk about growing the pie, as it were, I mean, is this about trying to take into account everything, or kind of like, are there limits to this?
So I think it's about innovation and actively creating value. And so this is how my view on responsibility might differ from what you've typically heard about responsibility. Often we think responsible business is one that does no harm. So right. You don't cheat your taxes, you don't exploit your workers, you don't pollute the environment. And obviously that's important, but it's not just that. You have to actively grow the pie through innovation. Right. So we often lambast a company if they do bad stuff, but you don't lambast a company for failing to innovate, but actually failing to innovate can have massive consequences. So if you think of Kodak, to give a concrete example,
sure.
Kodak CEOs are never given the same media backlash that a high-paid CEO gets today. Why? Because Kodak CEO never lined his own pocket. But that is of no consolation to the 150,000 workers who were made redundant because Kodak failed to innovate and launch digital cameras. So there, the idea is that the company just shrank the pie due to inactivity. So what we need to focus on is innovation and thinking beyond and actively creating value rather than just not doing any harm.
Right. Okay. But also you go on in the book to talk about, this growing the pie, but then you actually introduce this other kind of concept, related concept, which is, you talk about pie, I don't know how to pronounce this, it would be two words, be pie economics, but pie economics, I guess.
Pie economics, yeah.
Pie economics, yeah. There you go. Thank you. I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that sounds a bit similar to the triple bottom line approach. I mean, is that right, or is it wrong, or is there a difference, or can you talk a little bit more about pie economics?
Yeah, sure. So there are some similarities and some differences. So triple bottom line says that we should care about people, the planet, and the profit. And so when companies report, they shouldn't just report on profits, but also their contribution to people and the planet. But what triple bottom line wants is a balance between the three. They would see low profit and low planet and low people as being okay, but really pie growing is about growth and actively creating value. So it's not just about equality between the three. You can have equality if a company is ineffective and delivering value to nobody, but it's about being ruthlessly committed to excellence and innovation. And it's not fine if you're not harming people and the planet. You need to actively create value. And so what we want is not just a balance between the three, but we want the levels of all three to be high. So this goes back to the idea of innovation. And you might think, well, shouldn't any company strive to be innovative? Just a company that focuses just on profit should want to be innovative. But the whole idea of pie economics is that the innovation might be driven to create social value rather than the innovation being to create profit. So in the book, I talk about Merck, which chose to innovate to launch ivermectin, which was a drug to cure river blindness. Now, a company focused on profit would have never done that because river blindness is suffered by people in Africa who can't afford to pay massive amounts for drugs. But Merck wanted to innovate because there's a huge social problem out there, which was river blindness. And even though it wasn't clearly going to be profitable, they wanted to do this to serve wider society. And so that outperforms anything that Merck could be doing in terms of fair tax or reducing their carbon footprint, is how they have saved millions of people around the world from being blind.
Okay. And so to adopt this type of new kind of approach, this kind of pie growing mentality, I mean, is it just about mindset? I mean, you talk about innovation and stuff, but I mean, innovation is this thing that companies wrestle with all the time. Like, how's the best way to innovate? You know, is it light bulb ideas or is it a process driven thing? You know, so, you know, help me understand this adopting of a pie growing mentality. I mean, is it just about a mindset change, or do we have to actually do different things? Or is it both?
Yeah, so I would say it is primarily about a mindset change, but I would a little differ, because I would say just a mindset change might imply that the mindset change is actually quite easy. But actually, the mindset change here is really radical, because how do companies typically think about making investment decisions? So what finance professors like me have taught for 50 years is we do a calculation. We do something known as net present value analysis. You construct this massive spreadsheet, you try to calculate the costs and benefits of an investment, and if the benefits outweigh the costs, you do it.
Yeah.
Now that makes sense if you're thinking about investing in a factory, because I can estimate the number of widgets the factory produces and calculate the profits. But what are the revenues and the benefits from just investing in my employees' mental and physical well-being? What are the benefits of Merck launching ivermectin to cure river blindness? Yeah, that maybe their reputation is going to benefit, but you can't calculate that. So I think what first we need is leaders to be willing to actually move away from calculations. Is that often calculations are a crutch. They can say, we're going to do this decision because we made so much analysis, but actually this is to free them from the need to shackle themselves by reducing everything to a financial calculation, and just have the confidence that actually doing certain actions because they serve wider society may well pay off in the long term. And why, again, this mindset shift is actually really big is that we are typically taught to operate with a fixed pie mindset, right? Sure. From playing games when we were kids, right? If you win, I lose, right? If we play Monopoly, right? The way that I can get money is you land on my hotel and you give money to me. So this is something which is really ingrained in us. And, yes. And so the whole idea that actually our potential enemy, you might think, well, customers are people you're trying to rip off and get as much money as possible from. They're not. They are partners. And so that mindset shift is important. You said, is it just a mindset shift? There's one more thing than that is sure. The whole idea of purpose is also about what not to do. Right. And I think this is something which is critical, because often we think purposeful means altruistic and serving wider society. But purposeful means targeted and focused, right? If I do something on purpose,
Yes.
I'm doing something deliberately.
Yes.
And so what's important is for companies to say, well, yeah, there's so many problems out there. There's automation and climate change and inequality, but I can't solve every single one of the world's problems. Let me focus on the particular dimensions I'm going to change. And if this means paying less attention to climate change because that's not part of your expertise, that's fine. So I think what companies need to know is what to target, but also what to do less of.
Yeah, no, I think that's really kind of helpful, because actually sometimes it's you can figure out what you need to do by being more clear about what you're not going to do, and so eliminating kind of options, as it were. But
absolutely.
But what I mean, I know you're a finance professor, and therefore obviously you like evidence and calculations and data and things. So what does the evidence tell us about companies that are adopting this type of approach?
Yeah, so the heartbeat of the book is really the evidence, because otherwise, without the evidence, what I've said might just sound too good to be true, right? The idea that, oh, we'll just care about serving society and magically we're going to be more profitable in the long term. So there's a lot of studies in the book which show that this is real rather than just a pipe dream. In the interest of time, I'll just talk about one of them, which is one of my own studies looking at how a company treats its workers. Now, often we think if a company delivers more value to workers, that's at the expense of society. So that's why there are companies, let's say Sports Direct, which try to pay their workers as little as possible.
Sure.
But what I did, I looked at 28 years of data to show that companies that treat their workers better actually beat their peers by 2.3 to 3.8% per year. So that's 89 to 184% compounded. So this is serious business. And importantly, you might think, is this correlation or is this causation? Is it employee satisfaction leads to a company doing better? Or is it once a company is doing better, it can start giving employee gyms and free massages? And so a lot of the firepower was to try to show that it was more causation, employee satisfaction, causing the company to perform better.
Right. So it almost, in many ways, it's almost like validating. That was always the thing around back in the the literature, when I think it was back in the early 80s when the idea of the service profit chain was introduced, and that people got questioned around, well, what is the order of causation, as it were? And what you're basically saying is actually that treating people better leads to better performance. That's kind of what your study is kind of showing. Is that right?
Absolutely. And so that's really important, because people think about purpose as being a luxury. And particularly now in the current coronavirus crisis, people think, okay, well, now that the times are tough, should we just ignore these factors? But actually what the evidence suggests is that it's not a luxury. It's something that really does matter. And it might actually matter even more in crisis times. So there's another paper by one of my LBS colleagues, which actually shows that the returns to being purposeful are particularly important in a crisis. Why? Because in a crisis, there's a loss of trust. And so the companies which have developed trust through being purposeful over many years are the ones that are going to be performing particularly strongly.
Perfect. But also later in the book, you also discuss, start to talk about the impact of incentives. And I think this is one of the things I like about the book, is that it's because it's very financial in its leanings, given obviously because you're a professor of finance. You talk about the impact of finance and incentives, how they manifest through kind of like financial incentives.
Yeah.
But in that chapter, you also mention the idea of stewardship. Now, I really like the word stewardship, and because of what it implies. But given your premise, should the responsibility of stewardship, I mean, you talked about being stewardship around investors and stuff. I mean, should that not be widened out to broader like stakeholders as well?
Yes, it should. And let me start by defining what I mean by stewardship. Stewardship is you've got a duty of care, you're looking after something. So as an investor, right, if I'm to invest my money in a company, I don't just buy shares and then just hope that it's going to go up because the manager does some great ideas.
Right.
I'm going to steward the company by monitoring, perhaps asking the management tricky questions such as, how are you looking after your people and making sure that you're developing talent? And so that's what stewardship involves. It's engaging with a company.
But being active rather than passive.
That's absolutely it. So it's being active. Obviously, it's not micromanaging the company because you recognize that you don't have as much information, but just as being like an outside viewer, devil's advocate, an external sounding board, just like at the moment, companies pay management consultants millions of pounds for consulting fees. But as an external investor, particularly a large, serious institutional investor, you probably have a lot of insights that you'd be willing to provide for free because your incentives are aligned because you've got a big stake in the company.
Sure.
And that's indeed what venture capital often does. They don't just provide money, but they provide contacts and ideas to help the company grow. But then you mentioned, should stewardship be broader than just investors? And absolutely, it can involve both employees and customers. In what way? Well, one is when they choose which companies to be part of, they do this on more than just financial factors. So you might work for a company, even if the salary is not as high as another, because they treat the workers well, or that their actual mission is creating social value. And similarly for a customer, you might buy stuff locally, or you might buy organic food because of how they're treating their animals and the environment, rather than because it's, despite it being more expensive.
Right.
But it also involves engagement. So with a company, right? So often there might be crowdsourcing or employee suggestion programs. If there's a problem with the company, it's just easiest to complain about it but not do anything about it. But it requires being actively and engaged. And with customers, we can do things like contribute to customer review websites and provide feedback to companies. And those things are also important for stewardship.
Okay. So just to kind of wrap off this kind of the dive into the book. I mean, I get you, because the book is full of evidence. I mean, can you give me maybe an example or two of some companies that you believe are delivering both purpose and kind of profit, and sort of what they're doing and kind of how they've done it, just to kind of bring that whole sort of thing to life and like set the example in many ways? Because you know as well as I know, is that sometimes if you don't bring these things to life or make them feel real, then people are like going, yeah, that's interesting, but I don't know where to start, or I don't know where to start looking to put it into practice, as it were.
Yeah, so I'll use the example of Unilever, the consumer goods company. And so Unilever launched this sustainable living plan to ensure that it's contributing to wider society in many ways, reducing its environmental footprint, reducing the calories in its products and so on. And what was really good about how Unilever did it is they did this in a holistic way. Now, I know the word holistic is often bandied around and cliched. So what do I mean by that? Is they didn't just come up with that plan, right? They did lots of other things. They decided, well, how are we going to measure it? We're going to report on the progress of this. So in addition to our financial statements, we're going to put out a huge report as to whether we're delivering on progress. They also changed the reporting on financial factors. So Paul Polman, the CEO who was behind this idea, said, I'm going to stop reporting quarterly earnings because the true value of my business is not in my short-term numbers, it's in how I'm doing things like the Sustainable Living Plan.
Sure.
And also, they changed how they're paying their CEO. So Paul Polman, even though he's retired now, he is forced to keep 500% of his salary in shares in Unilever. And I think that's really important because that meant that his horizon was really long term. So the one twist to the evidence that I showed is that even though treating society well improves returns, that's only in the long term. So only you've got a long-term perspective will you actually deliver on purpose. And that's indeed why we can see, even after Paul Polman has left, Unilever is still continuing to be really purposeful in this crisis, because what Paul Polman wanted to do was to just instill purpose throughout the company so that it would still stay there even after he's retired.
Perfect. So, Alex, I mean, in kind of summation, if somebody's listening to this, or they're kind of maybe reading the kind of the highlights, and they were like going, brilliant, I think I need to kind of like, I need to get to grips with this. I mean, apart from buying your book, obviously, and reading it from cover to cover, I mean, what would be your best advice in terms of where they should start? I mean, what sort of things should you be doing or thinking to try and get themselves going on this sort of journey?
I think the first thing is to define the purpose of the company. And I would highlight again the fact that the purpose should be targeted. So I view purpose as the answer to the question, how is the world a better place by your company being here? How is the world a better place by your company being here? So purpose is not to earn profit, right? Profit is a byproduct of serving purpose, but the purpose might be just to provide financial inclusion or to connect people, if you're Vodafone or something like that. And the importance of being targeted is critical because people understand what purpose means at a personal level.
Yes.
I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer, but you'd never want to be a doctor and a lawyer and a teacher and an entrepreneur. You'd want to be one of those things. So companies should first define the purpose, then think about what are the milestones, what are the key performance indicators that they can measure in order to find out, are they genuinely putting this into practice? So for Unilever, it might be we're going to cut the calorie consumption, the calories of our ice creams by this amount, or we're going to reduce our carbon footprint, or we're going to commit not to using palm oil and so on. So discuss, well, what does this mean in terms of day-to-day decisions? And I think that's where some companies get lost, is that you have a great purpose statement, but it's not translatable into day-to-day actions. And so that that translation is really important so that it can guide everyday decisions.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Alex. I mean, hopefully that should give people like a good flavor, synopsis of kind of what the book is about and what it's driving towards. And I would urge people to kind of to grab a copy of it. But before we can move on to a couple of sort of fun questions I have at the end, is there anything else that you'd like to add that we've missed out?
I think it's just the centrality of purpose and how important it is to a company's success. So often purpose is confused with corporate social responsibility, or CSR.
Sure.
And that's actually a term that neither of us have used during this podcast. But why I don't use that term is CSR is seen as something that can be buried in a CSR department, and it's non-core, it's sort of marketing spin to give a company good public relations. But instead, purpose is fundamental to a business. It's how a company actually makes money. What is a company in business to do? Is it to make medicines that transform people's lives and so forth? And so this is something which should be a CEO level issue. And similarly, when I think about investors, well, often investors who care about purpose are often seen as socially responsible investors. But here I'm stressing that mainstream investors, even if your only goal as an investor is to make as much money as possible, which is not a bad thing if you're a pension fund, what you need to make money for your pensioners, you should still be considering things like purpose and employee engagement, because these things are financially material.
Particularly if you've shown as well is that people investing in purposeful companies produce kind of like better long-term returns as well, then that'd be a good bet from a good investment from a pension fund.
Absolutely.
So here's a couple of kind of questions, Alex, that I usually been finishing these interviews with, and it's based on the book I published last year called Punk CX, and we talked about this before. So what we're doing is like it's a couple of kind of almost like a word or brand association kind of questions, very quick fire.
Yep.
If I said to you, what one word or two words, if you like, do you think would describe a more punk approach to sort of experience? And and we can fold in kind of purpose into that as an element that's important to experience. So what one or two words would you think would describe a more punk approach to that?
I'd say unorthodox or unconventional.
Perfect. And the second one is like, what sort of company or brand do you think epitomizes that sort of approach?
I'd say Barry's Bootcamp, which is a boutique gym here in the UK.
Wow, Barry's Bootcamp. Never heard of them. I have to look them up. That's brilliant. So, Alex, thank you for that. So, where can people grab the book? Where's the best place to go?
Well, thanks very much. So on Amazon, you can find the book in 3 formats. You've got the hardback, the Kindle, and also the audiobook. And the audiobook is actually something I recorded myself because I care about purpose genuinely. It's not just a topic of research for me. So that's why I wanted to record it rather than have a professional actor. But also there is the website of the book, which is growthepie.net, where there have been many things on the topic of purpose which have happened since I finished the book, such as the coronavirus crisis. And so I've got a blog up there which updates people on the themes of the book and how they apply to more recent events.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure we get all that linked up. and point people in the right directions for the book and the website and everything else. But Alex, just want to say, one, congratulations on the book. And I hope it does really well. And lastly, just want to thank you for sharing your time and your experience with us today. That's been great.
Thanks so much, Adrian. It was a pleasure to be on the show.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.